Hello, and welcome to the Mothers of All Crime. This is a podcast where we deep dive into mothers involved in infamous crimes and scandals. I'm Monica, and this is Krystal.
This week on the Mothers of All Crime, we're going to be talking about Gabby Petito and more specifically, the new series on Netflix, American Murder, Gabby Petito.
I am so excited because I think this documentary, they did a really great job. And I don't know about you, but watching it, I started having deja vu because I felt like I had seen it before. And spoiler, Law and Order SVU did a episode based off of Gabby's story. Which I didn't know until after I watched the series on Netflix, because the entire time I'm like, why does this feel familiar? Like, it's so unique and bizarre that there had to be a reason, and it ended up Law and Order did a spin-off version of it. So
Was it SVU?
yeah, it was SVU.
Oh,
It was one of the newer episodes.
That.
Yeah, one of
I'm
the
not up to
more
date.
recent seasons.
Ooh.
No. Yep. So anyone want to spin off, go watch that. It was really good and clearly stuck in my brain.
Clearly, where it's like this is almost deja vu.
Yeah, it was the entire time. I couldn't figure it out until actually this morning when I was reviewing everything for our recording. I was like, why am I still thinking this?
That's so funny. It sounds like a good episode because there's a lot of twists and turns in this case. And I feel like for SVU, that's what you need. It can't be super like straightforward for something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And this was complicated. I agree though. I enjoyed the documentary. I felt like it was very tastefully done also, like very victim focused, which seems to be the new trend of true crime. And I definitely like that. And I think it's important.
I completely agree. And I think one thing the documentary did well is it showed the family dynamics, because a lot of the past documentary series or true crime things, they do focus on the offender, but that's mostly because the offenders are such a prominent part. And I think in this case, Gabby and her family had a really great dynamic, and that was what became into question. And Gabby was kind of the face of their relationship, I guess, where a lot of the time when they're focusing on an offender, it's the offender has multiple victims and like it was more of a action versus this was a relationship that turned dark.
Definitely. Like a serial killer, for example, you can't make it about each victim because the victims aren't really the story. The story is the killer. But in this case, because this is a relationship and this is also a trip, essentially, like this is I don't want to call it a vacation, but they were away together. And so it's about both of them. And the story doesn't make sense if you don't know a lot of details about them because they were so connected in so many ways. And the families knew each other, were aware of each other. So there's a lot of interdynamics, which you don't see, obviously, in stranger situations.
Absolutely. And I think one thing, I guess we can get into their story. They met and they were from the same area originally. And from my understanding, Brian was older than Gabby, right?
Yeah, he was older by like a year and a half, 2 years, not significantly older. They were in high school at the same time.
Right. And but they didn't date until after high school.
Right, after high school.
And I think that's kind of that interesting point where Brian left high school, didn't really know what he wanted to do, stayed around town. His parents moved and it was just him, and he was staying with friends and family, kind of couch surfed in his car. Like he didn't really seem like he had a place in the world. While Gabby had this really healthy family where granted, her parents were divorced or separated,
I don't think
but
they were married. I think
that's
they
where
were
I
just
couldn't figure it
separated.
out. Like, I really
They did
couldn't.
well, I guess it doesn't matter now, but I agree. I
No.
feel like if they were divorced, they would have said that. I think they just because they said they went their separate ways, which could imply divorce, but you'd have to get
Yeah.
married first. And I don't know. They were all, she was only the mom was only 20 when she had
Right.
Gabby.
They were
So it's
young,
possible, yeah, that
but
maybe
they got
they which is
along super well. And like,
well,
I think that's rare when parents separate, like having a really
mhm,
great co-parenting relationship plus your new significant others. The four of them had a
yeah.
really good dynamic, which I think for Gabby, it really showed like she had this really supportive, great family lifestyle versus
Yeah.
Brian was kind of on his own when they got together.
Yeah, but you would think that someone from a nuclear family like Brian had
Hmm.
a mom and a dad that were married for a very long period of time. He had a full biological sibling and they had a nuclear family dynamic. And yet it seems like it was much more toxic than Gabby's family, even though it wasn't maybe as perfect on paper, which I feel
Right.
like happens a lot, and it kind of speaks to how social media is fake and some of these labels that we give people in these normal families, like it's not really representative necessarily of how everyone's treating each other and other people. But I think her
Yeah.
parents showed a lot of grace for each other and they seem to just put their focus more on Gabby, which it seems so obvious that that's the right thing to do, but I do think in reality it's very difficult to do that, so I give them
Yeah.
kudos.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And it seemed like all four of them really cared, not necessarily cared about each other in like a loving way, but like their family. Like they have a daughter, and that daughter
Mhm.
could go to any parent, and there wasn't a repercussion or anything. But
Mhm.
throughout the documentary, I never once really got the vibe from anyone interviewed that Brian's family was a great one. I think you're right where it's on paper they were married, they had two children, they were still together, but nowhere was anyone like, "Oh yeah, he came from a loving home," or "Oh yeah, like his parents were supportive." There was a bizarre relationship between Brian and his mom that I'm sure we'll get into, but it was never like Gabby constantly there was this she was described as a really great friend and a good family member, and like there was that healthy happy sense versus whenever Brian's family's talked about, and I don't know if it's just because of what happened, but even them recalling early days, it was always just kind of like Brian was here and his family was here, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I do think that I mean, part of the thing though, I think, is that they had a child 10 years before they had Brian, which makes me think that his sister Cassie is significantly older than him, which
Hmm.
sometimes people plan it that way, but I would say usually not. And his parents, like, it's not like they separated and got back together. From what we know, they've been together continuously. So I wonder if maybe they had fertility problems or they just didn't want a second child. But they're older than Gabby's parents, who had her very young. And they'd already kind of raised a kid and they were ready to move on with the next phase of their life. Or that's what it seemed like to me. And if Brian wasn't going to go with them to their retirement life, essentially in Florida, then he could just deal on his own because they've already been parenting for so long.
Yeah.
And that's definitely not how it was with Gabby, who was the first child of all four of her parents. And
Right.
so and they're much younger, and they all have younger children as well. So I think that they were more locked in the parenting stage. And we'll never know how much of our bias is on what happened afterwards because obviously we weren't aware of these people prior.
Oh yeah, and I think it's also the people being interviewed, it's hard to separate
Mhm.
the current and the past when you're trying to do interviews like that. I think they did the best they could. It
Yeah,
was something I noticed during the documentary.
for sure. I mean, it changes the way that you speak about people after tragedy happens, separation, loss. It would be impossible for that not to shape your narrative. I do feel like they were trying to be realistic about how they felt in the early days and their first impressions and how they got along prior to anything bad happening. Um,
Right, because when you talk to Gabby's parent when the documentary
Mhm.
talked to Gabby's parents, they all kinda said, like, they liked Brian. Brian was nice.
Yeah.
He was always kind of odd, but he was a nice guy and they liked him and Gabby was happy. And early 2019 is when they met, and both Gabby and Brian to all their friends were, "This is love at first sight. It was amazing." They kind of that high school head over heels, falling in love mentality. And I think as a parent, you're like, "Okay, like, I have no reason to not like you. You seem nice and my daughter's happy and all of that jazz." So I think they in the beginning, it was just like a normal relationship. It was this new guy that Gabby liked and was hanging out with, but she never officially told her parents they were together. It was, "Oh no, we're hanging out," which I think is very much
Yeah.
her generation. Like, I think
But
we hear that a
that's also
lot.
very that's very 19. That's
Yes.
very, like, young. I don't think that's atypical. Also, I don't think it's atypical for your friends to be more aware of what's going on in your sex life and your love life than your parents.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that for Gabby, it wasn't that important to tell everybody they were officially together until she was very much locked in. And they basically decided very quickly that they were moving to Florida together,
And with
which
his
her parents were,
parents.
yeah, her parents were like, I guess they were cool about it, but also she was technically an adult. She was a young adult, but she can kind of do whatever she wants.
Well, it
So
didn't
they
seem like
were
she had a plan either. They didn't really touch on
right.
this in the documentary, but
Mhm.
the reality is if you are graduated high school, you're 19, your dream is to travel and hike and live this van life. She wasn't going to
Mhm.
college. She didn't do like that wasn't her plan. And so I think
Right.
as a parent, they probably looked at like, okay, well, if this is what she's going to do, all right. It's not like she had a 180. It's not like she had all these hopes
Right.
and dreams that all of a sudden she met a man and now moving to Florida. I think it was, well, she's not doing anything else. So, okay. Like,
Well, for sure. And she did get a job in Florida and seemed motivated towards her. I mean, she clearly had the dream about doing van life prior to Brian because
yes.
her ex-boyfriend that's in the documentary says that they had talked about doing it together and she'd also made references about doing it herself. So I think that that was something that she was always going to attempt. And whether or not Brian was involved, he seemed like he was along for the ride, in my opinion, that it wasn't his dream and it was very much her dream. And
I think
I mean, he put a lot of work into the van though, it seems. Like he pretty
I
much
think it
redid the
was a
whole thing himself.
combo. I think her dream was the travel blog version of it, and his dream was like
Mm.
the crunchy version of it. And I think it just kind of meshed together because van life gets glamorized on the internet. I feel like everyone's like, "Oh my
Mhm.
god, that's so cool. Look at that, amazing." But the reality is like you are sleeping in the woods most of the time. You're not like you're
You're
not
living in
showering
your
every
car.
day. You're living in your car. Like it's not exactly the
Yeah.
most glamorous version, but online it can seem so like I get it. And
Well,
I think he
minimalism is
was the
very
yeah. I think he was the, like,
yeah.
"I wanna live in the woods," and she was like,
Mhm.
"I wanna be a travel blogger," and that's how it
Mhm.
kinda meshed together.
I mean, she gave the vibe of being chronically online, which she was posting, but also she was definitely just looking constantly at other people's Instagrams. And it does look cool when people are camping and traveling to all of these
Yeah.
parks and going to waterfalls and, hiking. And it is cool, grabbing fruit off a tree as you walk by. Sounds like a absolute nightmare, honestly, but I think that the pictures are beautiful. And it's probably pretty cool until you're like, well, now I have an upset belly and I need indoor plumbing and I need to shower. And what if it's really hot out and we don't have AC? Can we run the AC all night? Do we need a generator? It
Yeah.
just feels like too small of a space for two people to realistically live in. It was a small van. Like that was not an RV. It was a van.
Yeah, and again,
Yikes.
it is very trendy right now. I know people have been doing it forever, not forever, but for a very long time, but I think right now it's becoming very trendy to go and do it because
Mhm.
of social media that it looks perfect. and beautiful and
Right.
relaxing. And the reality is a lot of the time it's not. And that's also those relationships. A lot of the couples doing it, they look like they live this perfect, loving adventure, and that's not necessarily what's happening. And I think the documentary also mentioned Gabby was learning how to edit and put it all together. And you can't just, it's not one take. You're taking 50 pictures to try to get one, or multiple videos. And they showed clips of her redoing stuff because she was like, "Ugh, that was weird. Okay, hold on." And I think it shows a
Yeah.
little bit more of a reality to it that, yeah, quitting your job and becoming a van travel blogger is awesome, but it's not as easy as you think.
It's definitely not. And I think we've even learned from doing this podcast that you don't put out every single thing, every single part that you say and do doesn't actually end up published. And just because you're putting out content doesn't mean it's immediately going to be viewed, immediately going to be liked. Like, it is a process. Some people hit right away, but most of the time it's not like that. And she was starting from nothing. She didn't know how to edit videos. She didn't know how to grow an audience. So she was just trying to figure it out, which I feel like is a cool thing to do, but also not necessarily easy and not a guarantee. She was kind of just willing to risk a few months trying to do this, which I think is cool, but it's definitely awkward to film yourself and to watch someone film themselves in a tiny little van. I don't know.
Yeah.
I feel
And
like
I liked it how they did a couple of voice notes and text messages that she stuff saw. And one thing that stuck out to me was this was her dream. There's no question, right? Because you had mentioned like she had talked to the ex-boyfriend, this boyfriend, friends of hers, like we knew this is what she wanted. But then you have the other side where she has messages saying, "We're going to buy a van. The weddings and babies is going to be pushed back." And you could feel that like, oh, like she felt like a little sad, but then she would flip and be like, "But I'm really happy about it." So it was an interesting kind of that moment where you could see her thinking about this stuff and the reality of you are pushing stuff back because you're spending a lot of money to try to make this dream work, which I thought was kind of so she had these thoughts already of, which I think is fear partially because of the unknown and it's a big commitment, but also when you're doing it with a partner, these other things that you might want are going to be pushed back. And it was very mature in reality. And then you wonder, okay, was she ready to do this or was Brian pushing it? Because the van was 100% in her name. All of it was 100% technically on paper hers.
it was. And it does seem like she paid for it, but that he put
Money
way more
into
sweat
it.
equity. He put money into it, but he also spent a lot of time and
manual
bought
labor.
materials and manual labor, and that it looked cute on the inside. They did transform it.
Oh yeah, it looked great.
So I'm sure that was not an easy endeavor. And also they had the dynamic of living with Brian's creepy parents. And it sounds like it was okay at first. And then his mom started having all kinds of issues with Gabby.
Yeah, it seemed like she was jealous of her son's
that's what I thought
giving his girlfriend attention, which icky. Like
icky, very like overbearing mother, babies her son kind of a vibe. And she seemed like she kind of resented Gabby's presence and maybe wasn't that enthusiastic about them taking off on this trip together. It doesn't sound like this was not what she would have had them do or what she would have Brian do. And I feel like she probably thought that Gabby was an influence on him because this was her idea.
Yeah. And I think like they were used to Brian going out on like a couple of day camping trips, but not leaving. Yet
for months.
I want to keep in mind they left him.
Right.
So interesting.
Well, it's not fair. Like the relationship that the mother and son have in this case, Roberta Laundrie and Brian Laundrie, it seems like it's supposed to revolve around Roberta, and Brian is supposed to move with her when she wants to move, stay with her when she's supposed to be in charge of him, and he's supposed to be fulfilling a role as a son. I feel like you see that a lot in mother-son dynamics, that kind of enmeshment that they had. And I think that another woman comes in and it is threatening to a mom that has that kind of dynamic.
Sure. Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
And then I think the last touch that I want to talk about before we go on to their on-road adventure is Gabby did end up making a friend Rose down in Florida, and they spent a lot of time together. And there was one incident where they had plans to go out, and Gabby got halfway there, turned around, had to go home because she realized she didn't have her ID. And it turns out Brian had stole her ID from her wallet so that she couldn't go out. And they would get in fight. Like, he became very, again, controlling, similar to what you said about his mom. Like, it needs to be about me, not about you. Why aren't you paying attention to me? We would see text messages coming up on the screen on basically him being like, why aren't you with me? Why aren't you listening? Why blah, blah, blah. And then right afterwards,
I was so glad they included the texts.
Yeah, the texts were huge.
It was powerful. Yeah.
But then afterwards, he would buy her gifts or do something sweet, and this is that start that we see of the, I don't want to label it yet, but the narcissistic control that Brian's starting to show in this relationship. And I think up until this point, it's very easy to hide certain behaviors from the outside, but then every once in a while it creeps out. And I think this was the first time it had creeped out into the world, where her friends were like, this isn't healthy, this isn't great.
Yeah.
But Gabby's response is, well, I love him and look at this sweet thing that he did. And it's really hard when you have that emotional connection. It's easy to forget the bad and look at the good.
I don't know if I'm ready at this point in the story to call him a narcissist, but I do think he was love bombing her as a way of making up for the not good things that he was doing. It sounds like he was talking about how emotional he was and crying all the time, and that he was very jealous of the friends that she made while working at Taco Bell. And it makes me wonder if one of Brian's big motivations for doing this van life thing was to isolate Gabby.
Right. I do think that's part of it.
Yeah, because then you don't have to worry about her having coworkers or a friend. He already got her to Florida away from her family. So it's just further and further hiding her.
Yeah. But so then they did go on the road. They bought the van. They went out. And we got to see pictures of them and the travel. And in June of 2020...
Oh, I'm sorry. Did we talk about the engagement?
That's literally June 2020. Yeah. Yeah. I was going to say about a year in travel. They'd been together for a year, not year of traveling, a year together.
Okay.
They went to like this.
I was going to say they didn't take off in the van.
I thought, didn't they leave? And then like right at the beginning of that trip?
They had bought the van, I think, right after the engagement, but they didn't actually drive away with it. I don't actually know. Maybe I'm wrong about that. That's how I have it in my notes, but maybe I'm backwards. But they weren't on their they weren't on their expedition where they were going to be full-time living van life. They weren't doing that. They were on vacation, essentially.
Yeah. And it was just because of the picture. Maybe I'm like, oh, they had the van, so it was just the start.
Maybe they did have the van.
I don't know.
Maybe they had the van and they just took it camping. Because I mean, it wouldn't be a terrible idea to try it out also before you go away for months. So it's possible that right. Okay, because I really want to talk about the proposal.
Yes. Yeah.
Because
weird. Yeah. Weird proposal.
Weird. I'm sorry. Like, I don't believe their story about it at all. Because like, do you want me to tell her or do you want to tell it?
Yeah, you can tell it. You can tell it. Because
so they're camping in the middle of nowhere. And Brian decides it's such a beautiful place that they should just get engaged now. So he impulsively, without a ring, drops down on one knee and proposes. And it doesn't matter that he didn't have a ring because a firefly landed on her ring finger at the exact second that he would have been putting a ring on. So nature wanted them to be together.
Listen, if it is real, what a cool story.
There's no way that's real. That doesn't sound real. Why would a firefly, like, that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, maybe there were fireflies around. That would be pretty. But he could have gotten a ring because he had told people that he was going to propose. So,
Right.
and you don't have to go crazy expensive for an engagement ring, but if you're planning to propose, why not?
She wasn't exactly
have
like a flashy
something?
girl. Like, I feel like she's more of
Yeah.
like a simple, small, like that wasn't their vibe. So it's not like he had to do something
For sure.
extravagant. Totally agree.
But anything would have been
Something.
better. Yeah.
And her mother found out because his mom, Roberta, posted it on Facebook. That's
Oh
how
my God.
everyone found out. Excuse
That's
me?
so crazy. That's so crazy.
First of all, my mother would kill me if she found out I was engaged on Facebook from someone else.
Oh my God. Yeah, but it seemed like Gabby didn't really want to tell people, which also is
I don't think
strange.
Gabby knew. I think Gabby was like, she had that romanticized, like every girl does. Not every girl, but a lot of girls, you get into the relationship, you're like, oh, I love him. I want to marry him. Most people think about it.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think she was like ready in reality. And he never asked her dad. Not that he has to, but a lot of people still like that and of like concept, not like if he said no, you're not property. But I think a lot of people still like that idea. So her parents had no clue.
Definitely.
I don't think Gabby totally knew. And throughout the documentary, other than when the media got involved, nobody, and other than Brian and every once in a while Gabby, but mostly just Brian, nobody called them fiancés. They were still boyfriend. Did you notice that?
I did notice that there were a lot of references to them being boyfriend and girlfriend and way less to them being engaged. I do think that Brian was describing it that way.
But no one else was, which is weird. Granted, I've never been, like, I'm not engaged. I don't know. You are. You've been married. You're married. Like, people still?
I've been married.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you knew what I meant. But like,
no, I meant. It just sounds like past tense, which is so funny. Yeah, no, it's certainly the kind of thing like you don't tend to revert backwards, but I wonder if maybe it's the majority of time that people knew them, they were boyfriend and girlfriend. So in their minds, that's more.
Or people didn't support it.
It was kind of
that's how I took it.
Well, that could be too. Or maybe because there's no ring and you didn't talk to your families about it, maybe it doesn't really count.
Yeah. It just felt weird. But I was like, I don't know, maybe people do that.
I don't think people do that. And I don't
think so either.
And I think that most people tell their immediate family when they get engaged, at least before they put it on social media.
Particularly close family.
Yeah.
It's not like she was like estranged from her parents.
Exactly. And I think that they thought it was strange, and they probably also didn't really take it that seriously because they were very young. They didn't have any money. They didn't have any job. They didn't have any plans. There was no realistic way for them to support themselves and be married and be adults. So it's sort of like, okay, that's cute that you're engaged.
Right.
Like, I don't know. I feel like they didn't take it that seriously. And her dads were like, yeah, like, okay, engaged. That's cute. I mean, the firefly thing I think was fake. I think most of the story was fake. I think this also, not that everyone who proposes is controlling, but I do also think that this could be a sign of him trying to isolate her. Why are you proposing right now? It doesn't really make sense for the stage of life that you guys are in.
Yeah. I don't know. It was an odd one. It just
felt very impulsive.
And everyone's like, well, here we are.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you can just say you're engaged, and you are if you both agree to it. That's the only thing that you have to do. But it just didn't feel like they did a lot of the traditional steps that I would have expected. Especially she's a Long Island girl. I'm very familiar with that kind of family and that kind of like this should have been a big deal, and it doesn't seem like it was a big deal, which makes me feel like it wasn't a real engagement.
Yeah. Or people didn't consider it real. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Partially because she's far away from her family also.
Yeah. Well, after their real or unreal proposal, they did end up on the road, and they started their national travels. They started from Florida and drove out west. They made pretty fast progress, I feel,
Mm-hmm.
and made it all the way to Utah by August of 2021, which I think was only about 40 days on the road. So,
Yeah.
to me, that feels far, but I guess if you're moving every day, it's probably not as far.
Yeah, I
But
mean, it would only take you a few days really to drive to Utah, I think, from Florida, but I would have imagined they would have been stopping a lot and camping. I wonder if
yeah,
maybe that was just the destination and they were always planning to spend more time in Utah, because it seems like they did spend a lot of time in Utah and Wyoming.
yeah.
So maybe
So
that was the destination.
yeah, it seems like that was their goal, was that region, and beautiful landscapes, big
Oh,
hiking.
yeah.
So like I get that's where they would want to start, particularly if you're starting a blog. There's a lot of aesthetic stuff out there.
Right.
Um, but I think this is where we start the downhill version. And in Moab, Utah, there was an anonymous caller who called saying that they witnessed someone slapping a girl and then getting in a van together. And
Yes.
it turns out that that was Brian and Gabby in their van, and they were pulled over by the police. And during the documentary, we got the body cam footage, which was, I'm so glad, very interesting. And
Yeah. Did
throughout,
you see that at the time when this was happening?
no,
The
I had
body footage?
heard of
Oh,
it.
really?
But that was the first time I had watched the entire, I think I had seen like clips of it,
It's
but
kind
that
of
was the
long.
first
So
time for the whole thing. Yeah.
yeah, I watched it. I watched it when it was going on, but it was startling to see. I loved the way they edited this documentary series, and I felt like
Hmm.
it was very powerful the way that the footage was used. And yeah, I mean, I was glad that they included all of that. It was really necessary.
Yeah. And basically the short version of it is they got pulled over. The police walked to the side of the car. Gabby's crying. Brian's very calm. They pull her out of the car. She's more or less hysterical. And very standard situation where they're going to separate the two parties. They're going to talk to them separately and get the stories.
Mm-hmm.
And the cop brought Gabby over, and she basically is, he hit the curb. It's my fault. I'm the responsible. I'm so sorry. Like, very, it's all my
Mm-hmm.
fault.
Yeah.
And saying, basically defending him and his actions. And then she asked like if she could have her phone because she just wanted to call her mom. She basically was having a panic attack. And I do think the
Yeah.
cop stayed very calm during the conversation, was very much trying to, like, she had marks on her arm, like, okay, did you get hit recently? Like, asking those
Yeah.
questions. And very, I think he handled her very well. Versus you have Brian talking to another cop, laughing, smiling, joking. Oh, she's crazy. She attacked me. She hit me. I love her. I nothing could go, like, very, then joking. Like, it was
Right.
creepy. Like
They were like buddies. They were clowning around. Brian really didn't seem upset in the situation, and Gabby was distraught.
yeah.
And when they got pulled over, Brian was driving the van and he was doing 45 and a 15. And then they hit the curb when they were pulling over. And Gabby said that she grabbed the steering wheel. And that's what he said too, which is also a crime. And she pretty much is immediately confessing to assault, to battery, to reckless driving. I mean, she's immediately saying, I guess I hit him first. I thought it
Mhm.
was interesting when they said that they didn't drink also, because you sometimes see escalation of violence with alcohol, but they were apparently completely sober all the
Yeah,
time.
I do believe that they were sober, and I also wrote down
Mhm.
her quote of, I guess I hit him first, because that came up
Yeah,
where
I
the
wrote that
cop then
too.
came back to him and was like, he said that you hit him trying to get, like, you tried to hit him with your phone
Mhm.
and he hit you. And she's like, well, yeah, I guess I did hit him first. And you could see
Right.
the processing of her being like, she very much, in my opinion, you could tell that she's like, I didn't know what else to do, but yeah, I probably did do that, because they also put a picture in here and it was titled 41 Days on the Road of her with a black eye. So
Yeah.
I think she probably did hit him out of like a reaction of like, please don't hit me. And it was probably more of a defense, where when confronted, again, very honest, of her going, well, yeah, I guess I probably did touch him first if you want to be technical about it. But if I didn't, this, like, she knew what would have happened. And you could see the processing kind of happening. And then she started having another like panic moment. There was that brief moment of clarity, I think, for her. And then it went back to the panic, which was heartbreaking to watch.
I found several things about this heartbreaking. You mentioned that she asked for her phone to call her mom, and I thought that was really sad. And it shows that she does reach out to her mom in times of crisis, that she relies on her parents in, you know, upsetting circumstances like this, which I think it was important to include. I don't remember from when I watched this at the time that Brian had marks on his face as well. I remember Gabby having them, but they both had injuries.
Yeah.
And yeah. I
100%.
also thought when the one cop, because there was footage of them talking to Gabby and talking to Brian, but there's also inter-cop dynamics happening.
Yep.
And I remember when the one guy said that there's really no discretion in domestic violence cases because women tend to go back to their abusers and they might get killed, and that they couldn't really see the situation escalating to Gabby killing him, which I just thought was so sad.
Yeah, I don't think the cops at any point believed that Gabby was the aggressor here. However, what I feel like they got criticized a little bit of like, how could they let her go back, which is a fair response, but people also forget like their hands are tied in certain circumstances. Like there's nothing, if she's sitting there saying, I did this, I started it, I am the aggressor, there's nothing, even though you're looking at them and you're like, I know you're not, there's nothing they can do. And that's what I think is so hard, is towards the end of the documentary, there was some critique of the police because the two of them were separated. She was given the van, he got brought to a hotel. And you would have thought like, okay, the other way around. But because of what the two of them were saying and the story that was being told, that was the reaction they had to have without pressing charges on Gabby. And they knew Gabby wasn't the problem. But in order to not arrest her, which they didn't want to do, you could tell, this was their only option.
So I was interested on the police got so much criticism in this case. Yeah. And two of the officers on the scene got put on probation as a result of this. And there was assessments made to see if the cops were at fault, what should have been done, you know, what the right response would have been. In a lot of states, it's a mandatory arrest for a domestic violence call, which is true in Utah as well. But they actually ended up reclassifying this incident as a mental health issue and not a domestic violence call. So in that case, if it's a mental health issue, you don't have to arrest anyone. So they did have that discretion. But I think that because what they were saying did not match the third party 911 call who was not involved, I feel like, I don't know what you think, but I think that they should have arrested both of them. And I think that maybe, I don't know if that would have changed the trajectory of what was going to happen ultimately, but I think that maybe it would have, and maybe that would have been a real reality check for, hey, this is serious. You actually can't assault someone. It's actually not okay for either of us to be harming each other. And it, to my understanding, is the 911 call sees Brian hitting Gabby. They're saying that he was basically doing it in self-defense to get her away. So it's now escalating to she's hitting you, you're hitting her back. I feel like they should have probably been arrested, both of them.
I don't think it would have made a difference, to be honest. If anything, I think it would have made it worse. So
don't you think, though, that maybe her parents bailing her out of jail, like, would have I don't know, encourage
Well,
her
here's the thing.
to come
There
home.
might not have been a bail. So a lot of the time you're just released
That's
on your
true.
own recognizance, particularly if you're not from the area. And a lot of the times there's a history of arrests actually increase violence when it comes to domestic violence.
Mm,
And because then it turns into, well, you got me arrested. This is your fault.
right.
How dare you?
Right.
And let's look at
Well, that's
their
why I thought both of them
yeah.
being arrested would
And
have
look
been
at their
good.
so they were told to be separate for one night. If you got back together afterwards, that's your decision. But one night, do not talk to each other,
Yeah.
do not text, do not anything. They got back together a couple hours later. They were on the road that like they didn't listen. So
Right.
and that's just it wasn't surprising to me. And I think police don't want to arrest someone that they know is a victim. And sometimes they have to because of legal reasons. But during their interaction, Gabby was constantly saying, I have OCD. I have this anxiety. So most of what she was projecting was mental health, which is where their loophole
Yeah.
was. Because
Yeah,
they could
absolutely.
tell she wasn't the problem. But because you could see with them talking to each other, this guy's like, there's no way that she's like the one talking to her. He was like, it's not her. Like, there's nothing we can do. But
Right.
he's like, there's nothing she's not the problem
Yeah.
here.
And
But
you are right that it may not have changed anything because they would have probably just gotten right back together. That happens a
and
lot.
unfortunately, until you are ready, anyone and everyone can tell you. You can have arrests, you can have everyone in your life telling you. It doesn't matter until you see it or until it gets so bad that something happens. And
Right.
I think the arrest actually it would have just prolonged the inevitable, in my opinion. Or it would have made things worse behind the scenes for longer. And I do appreciate that they didn't do the arrest because I think that would have sent her into a spiral, but also cling to him more. Where like she was already, everything was my fault. If they got arrested, she would have, in my opinion, internalized that. Well, like, oh, well, he got arrested because of me. He's so good to me. I don't deserve it. We saw that quote a couple times from her. He doesn't deserve
You're
this.
right.
This is what I did. I don't think it would have made a difference.
I think our differing perspectives on this also make it so obvious why Monday morning quarterbacking is really, you know what I mean? Because we can look at it as this is what I would have done and the outcome would have been this. And this is why I think this was the right choice. But we don't really know how things were in the moment. And I'm not saying that the police were blameless 100%. And I'm not saying that they made all of the same decisions that I would have made or even what their protocols would have recommended. But they're making in the moment decisions and they only have some information. They don't have the amount of information that I have now, which
100%.
is completely changes everything.
And that's what's so
and that
hard.
is really sad. Yeah.
The only reason that this incident is being looked at with scrutiny is because of what happened. Otherwise, no one would have said a thing. So
definitely, because this kind of stuff happens all the time.
Oh yeah.
And you can't always predict how things are going to escalate.
You can't at all, ever, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
Because
you can predict it, but you may just be wrong. You might just be wrong.
Because you're going off of stats and experience. Yeah. You're like, this is most likely what's going to happen, but who knows? And I think what did happen is really sad, but I don't think anybody would have guessed it would have happened so quickly.
And to me, in the body cam footage, it's obvious that Gabby is hysterical and Brian's very calm. And to me, that makes it seem like she's the victim and he is in control. But I could also see how you could interpret that multiple ways. And she's so hysterical. She's confessing. Maybe she feels guilty about something as well. There are multiple ways to interpret the situation. And yeah, that's why it's hard to be the person making these life or death decisions.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you may not even realize it's that serious. Which, yeah. I didn't like that the cop kept saying, though, that his wife had anxiety. I thought that was annoying. It's like, this has nothing to do with your wife.
Well, I think he was trying to get him talking. So, what a lot of people do from watching different body cams and different research stuff, the more you talk about his wife might not actually have anxiety. And that's the thing. Is he's trying to get the person in the back of his car talking. At least that's how I kind of saw it. Like, oh, I relate to you. You're my buddy. I get it. Because then if he starts talking and then he slips up, that gives him that information that he needs.
Right.
I totally got it. I get where you're coming from. Because I was like, this isn't about you. Why does it matter? But also, I saw after he said it again, and when Brian was responding, yeah, I know she's crazy. I don't know what happened. Like, that's where I was like, oh, he's the same cop that interviewed Gabby. He's the one going, she is the victim. He is the problem. I think he was trying to get him to start talking about what happened and hope that he slipped up a little of getting him to admit that he touched her. Because at that point, it was always, I'm in defense mode. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
When
He could have been trying to be more relatable.
Yeah, when I noticed that was the same cop who interviewed Gabby, that's what it dawned on me. I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's what he was trying to do.
Yeah. I mean, they tried, and the solution that they came up with was that Brian went to a hotel and Gabby got the keys back to the van, partially because it's solely in her name.
Right.
And they recommended a place where she could take a shower. Her mom told her that she maybe should just come home, and she didn't. So after the hotel room, Brian comes back to the van and they go from Moab to Salt Lake. So they're still in Utah, but they've just changed cities, locations.
Right. Because you got to get away from where the cop was. Like,
get away from the heat,
yeah,
for sure.
Like, you don't want to be pulled over by the same police department twice. That would be really bad, particularly after you've been told to separate.
Yeah. And so that brings us to, I think we're at August 22nd, 2021. Yep. And Gabby is texting her ex-boyfriend, Jackson, who's featured in the documentary. And it sounds like they don't really talk much prior to this, but she wanted to reach out to him. And it seems like she had an opportunity to talk to him because Brian ended up flying to Florida to empty a storage unit. And so Gabby was staying in a hotel by herself in Salt Lake. And that's when she actually ended up posting the one video that ended up on YouTube, the Gabby and Brian video. But she had mentioned to Jackson that she was wanting to leave Brian. In the days that followed, they texted and they Snapchatted. And then that brings us to August 27th, which she called Jackson that day, and he was at work and missed the call, which was really heartbreaking to see him talk about in the documentary. That's obviously not his fault, but he probably thinks about that all the time.
Survivor guilt. Yeah. Because the reality is if he picked up, it wouldn't really have mattered, but
no, it would have probably not changed anything, but I'm sure he feels a level of guilt and responsibility, and it's hard to have regrets like that. Yeah, it's really chills.
Particularly because she had mentioned to him that she was planning on leaving Brian, she just didn't know how. And when she was talking about it, the ex-boyfriend was like, she seemed scared, she seemed concerned, like, this is he's like, I knew that they were together, I think they said a year, that she wanted to, she just didn't know how or what he would do if she did leave. So I see how, like, you would have a lot of guilt of, well, if I had picked up, maybe things would have been different.
Right. Like maybe she was asking for a ride. Maybe she was asking for a plane ticket. I mean, the reality though is that she could have called her parents.
Right. Yeah. But I think that was more
so like Jackson is not, for sure, but it's not like this is his responsibility at all.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And she was talking to her mom that day as well. And that's when they were texting, and she was implying that she was maybe going to buy Brian out of the van and just do a single van life girl experience. So those were text with her mom that she definitely wrote herself.
Yeah,
And
100%.
the last known footage of Gabby Petito was at 2:11 p.m. at a Whole Foods in Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought the Whole Foods was in Wyoming. Was it not?
Oh, you know what? You're right. It is in Wyoming.
Yeah, Jackson
You
Hole,
are.
Wyoming.
You are right.
Because
You're
they
right.
went from Salt Lake City up to like the Yellowstone
To Jackson Hole.
area, Jackson Hole.
Right.
They went to lunch at this like Mexican place, got in a fight,
Right.
and there's text message of her being like,
People
"This
saw
food
that.
didn't sit well with me."
Right.
And then they went to the Whole Foods, and that was when she was disappeared. Basically, no one heard from her.
Right. And I also thought, I haven't seen anyone talk about this, but I wonder if she was getting sick to her stomach a lot from the stress, and
Probably
that was like part of it.
That's a good thought.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah.
Because one thing that I did kind of put together was she was telling her mom that Brian was like, okay, you could buy me out. She told the ex-boyfriend she wanted to get away. Brian seemed very interested. He wasn't working or had any kind of stream of income during this time that I'm aware of. And
yeah,
so if she presents the idea of like, I'll give you money so you'll have like reimbursement and I could make more money, presenting it like for us if I'm by myself. Like, I wonder if that was her safe way of trying to put out there of like her going by herself to do stuff, or trying to like lay some groundwork without directly saying, I'm out. I want to be out.
right. Yeah, absolutely. I think that because she even said in the text to her mom that she didn't say that she was going to break up with him, but just that she was going to buy him out.
Yeah. And so if you are scared of the person you're with, afraid of what they're going to do when you leave them, that's an easy way to be like, hey, if this is our plan and our journey together, what about this avenue? You could get your own van and we could do this tandem van thing. Like, I could see that trying to be a safe way to and introduce the idea to him.
Yeah, I think so too, because I think that's very common behavior too, not even just in a toxic abusive situation, but just in a relationship, just kind of be backing away without maybe being so obvious that I'm breaking up with you, but more of just creating some distance so that it's a little bit easier to ultimately actually cut ties. Because right now they're living together, and they're together 24/7, and there's no distance and there's no space at all. So I think that it would be really hard logistically to break up with someone if you're living in a van with them.
Oh, yeah. The only this is a very random connection. The only connection I have is like the 90 Day Fiance season recently, where there was like a lesbian couple that went and did van life and then broke up very quickly.
Yeah.
And I think that again, it shows like you can have a good relationship, but the minute you are in this van, you're in a tight space, you're always with that person. You can't like go into the other room and like take a minute. It's you are on top of each other. And I think it just takes everything and puts it under a microscope and a hot plate, and you're like, here we go.
I mean, when you travel with someone, you learn a lot about them. Yeah. And even if you lived with them before, which they did, but they lived at his parents' house and then they lived at his parents' condo, and they had a lot more space and rooms and distance and separate cars that they could drive away in. And now they have one car that they're sharing, and it's also their bedroom, their dining room, their living room. Their entire lives are in this extremely small space. And I think that that would put a lot of strain on the best of relationships, which is not what it seemed that they had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. So that was August 27th. And then a couple days later, August 30th, Gabby's mom gets a text that put up alarm bells, to say the least.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it basically was saying, coming from Gabby's phone, asking her to reach out to Stan. And Stan is her grandpa, who she referred to
Right.
as Grandpa. And the fact that she was using his first name was bizarre, to say the least.
Very bizarre, especially because she was talking to her mom, a family member, who would know
Right.
exactly who she was talking about if she said Grandpa. Even if she said Grandpa Stan, that would be less weird. But just
Right.
help Stan?
Yeah.
It's strange. I feel like you don't drop grandparents' names and just call them by their first names. Unless it's like maybe a step-parent situation, but if she
Or like as
always
a
called him
joke
Grandpa.
or yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think at first Gabby's mom kind of justified as like, oh, maybe she's driving and Brian's just texting for her.
True.
Which again, a fair response. Because at this point, and what I think her mom did really well is she was able to kind of recall how she was feeling in the moment really well. And her mom's like, listen, I thought it was weird, but I justified it because maybe she was driving, maybe she was talking. Like, it could have been a couple things. Still bizarre that he would have, like, if she was like, hey, can you tell mom that, like, Grandpa isn't responding or isn't sending? And he would type Stan. Like, that's still weird. But I could see
It
how
is
you could
weird,
justify
but
it.
right. It's not deranged text though. They're not alarming on their face text. It was just weird. And
Yeah.
it's kind of odd, And I think that in hindsight, for sure, it seems extra bizarre.
Yeah. But this was the last text that she got from Gabby or Gabby's phone. And
right.
so she's like, okay, Gabby had been really good about checking in, getting updates, all that jazz. And then she just stopped hearing from her. So she reached out to Brian's parents and didn't get an answer. And Brian's sister didn't get an answer. And both parents, her dad then was like, no, I hadn't heard from her either. He starts reaching out. All of the friends were like, Gabby went MIA, which was abnormal for her. It seems like she checked in at least once a day, if not more than that. And then all of a sudden, radio
and she
silence.
has no social media posts, not checking in anywhere, not answering calls, not answering texts. It's very unusual behavior for her, especially someone who's attempting to vlog their life would be always accessible. You would think.
And then with that, the mom noticed she went from, and this is such an iPhone thing to notice, that she went from blue bubbles to green bubbles when texting his mom, which definitely, if you're texting another iPhone person, it without you saying send as normal text message because like you have like bad service or something, it's weird.
Right.
And
yeah, I mean, it's a weird change that would happen because if it went blue the first time, that meant it was received by an iPhone. And if it's green now, it's like, is the phone off? Am I blocked? Do they not have service?
Yeah. What's going on?
Right. Yeah, a change has happened, which makes me think you read the text and you chose not to answer it.
Yeah. And also, if you're, as a parent of like your quote future son-in-law, if you're texting them being like, hey, I haven't heard from the kids. Have you? Are they okay? You would think that you'd be like, oh, yeah, heard from them like yesterday. Or no, I haven't. Oh my God. I wonder if like you would think that these parents would, considering the context that they started texting about, would have been quick to respond when it's talking about your children's safety.
Yeah. And just even out of politeness, you think they would acknowledge any of these messages. And there's no way that both of his parents and his sister are just not checking their phones and are just completely unable to be contacted.
Yeah. And so eventually they sent a text to the parents being like, you know what? We're going to call the police. Something doesn't feel right. Something isn't okay. So they actually called and filed a missing persons report for Gabby. And that's when it kind of started where, well, you have to do it. You can't do it where they are or last known. You have to do it where they reside or the most recent residence.
Right.
Which
so it got
complicates
kind
it
of
if you're living in
complicated.
a van.
Yeah, this This is interstate jurisdictions now that we're working with as well, because she went missing in Grand Teton, Wyoming. Her parents are calling from Northport in Long Island, New York. But most recently, her last address was in Florida. So, yeah. So it's all of these different jurisdictions are trying to work together, essentially, because there's issues with jurisdiction and who has the right to do what. So obviously you're going to try to involve the local officers who ended up going to the Laundrie home that day.
Yeah, on August 11th of 2021.
September.
September. Wow, I have 9/11 written down too, and I said August.
It's a tough day.
It is. So they sent the officers to the home. Brian's parents opened the door. Basically refused to talk. They're like, we're not answering any questions. We have an attorney. You can talk to our attorney. Which, red flags everywhere.
Right.
If you already have a prepared attorney for something that the police are showing up at your house, that you hypothetically shouldn't know why police are just showing up at your house.
Right.
But that's not all.
No, they asked to talk to Brian, and they say that he's there, but he won't talk to anyone. And then they refuse to comment on where Gabby is, but her van is in the driveway.
Yep. So they did say that Gabby wasn't there. But instantly I think the police were like, hold on a minute. So they ran the plates, and because they asked about the van, and according to his parents, they're like, oh, it's both of their van.
Right.
And then the police pushed back, were like, hold on, this is all in her name. You're telling us her van is here, Brian is here, none of you will talk to us, but Gabby's not here. Well, where is Gabby? I'm not going to talk to you. Talk to my attorney. So they took the van. And that kind of triggered the something fishy is going on here, for sure. I think for the local police.
And for her parents, this was the moment that everything changed.
Yeah.
Her mother describing how she felt at that moment when she found out that Brian was home and that he had a lawyer it was devastating.
I think it was the lawyer that really took the cake for it all, because it'd be one thing if he was home. Not that makes it okay. Don't get me wrong. I think he had come back before, and she probably like, oh my God, she's in a hotel by herself, blah, blah, blah. But the fact that the van was there as well, and he had a lawyer, I think that's when she was like, oh my God, something bad happened. Because why else would you have a lawyer? I mean, why would you spend $25,000 to retain an attorney if you did nothing wrong?
Yeah. Well, that was what his sister was saying, was that they got in a fight. She's in a hotel and he came home. But why does he have the van then? And why does he need a lawyer? If you just left her in a hotel room, you don't need a lawyer.
Yeah.
And you had a lawyer before the cops came here.
Right. And already done. Yep.
Right.
Well, I think
also we don't see Brian. I was just going to say, we do not see Brian in any of the footage. I was not able to find like really any evidence of him being in there, but they do say he's there, and obviously the van got there.
Right.
But I'm skeptical of everything that they're saying.
Yeah, I do think he was there just because they had no reason to have him be anywhere else. And because we know down the line other things happened, but he definitely, in my opinion, was in the house, and he's probably just hiding somewhere because God forbid they did come into the house. Like the parents opened the door and then kind of stood next to each other so you couldn't see inside the house. So he either was like right there listening or he was hiding, in my opinion.
Yeah. And the police tried to appeal to them, don't you think Gabby's parents deserve to know if she's okay? And, you could just reassure them that everything's okay and let us know the last time you were in contact with her. And they just keep saying that they understand, but that they can't help.
Yeah. Awful.
So they totally shut it down. And the cops all think it's very suspicious and odd. The family's devastated. And I guess this is kind of the next phase of this documentary starts here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the case itself, now we're going to start getting into the investigations and all the different dynamics of that. It really took on a life of its own. So I think that'll be really good for episode 2 of Gabby. Because I think both of us have so many thoughts about how that was handled and
definitely
how everything kind of, the puzzle pieces really did come together, which was nice to see a little bit. Devastating, but nice to see.
It was definitely very interesting, but I do have a lot of thoughts, feelings, content that I want to discuss.
Yeah.
And so we'll get into that in part 2.
Any final thoughts for their relationship up to now, their travels, anything before she disappeared?
Well, it's not necessarily about that, but I did want to mention, and I forgot to earlier, that I loved how they were showing Gabby's artwork and Brian's artwork, and hers was all so light and beautiful and his was very dark. And I just felt like thematically it worked really well and it showed a lot without it made you feel like you knew them a little bit better, or at least it did for me.
Point. Yeah. I think that was subliminal for me, where in the moment, now that you mention it, I'm like, yeah, they were super different, but it wasn't something I had picked up on. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if that was their intention. That's just what I gathered from it, but I thought that was I mean, I really liked how they included so much about their personal lives. I don't know how I felt about Gabby reading like texts and journals and stuff. They used her voice for the recreations, and I don't know if I loved that, but I did love all the drawings and the text and things like that. How about you?
I kind of liked the voice because I think it made her a real person. Because I think a lot of the time it's very easy to, like, the text and stuff were super powerful, and that video footage, I think all of that was really powerful. But I think hearing her read texts about the dynamic, particularly the harder dynamic parts of their relationship of, well, he was mean to me, but I'm so lucky to have him. I think it really reinforced that she was just this naive, young, in love girl who wanted an adventure. I think it brought her to life. That it's easy to read something. It's easy to see someone on TV. You know what I mean? I think it just brought her a little bit more into people's life. But I think up until this point, I do think her mom specifically was really great about recalling how she felt in the moment. I think other people in the documentary struggled with that difference of remembering what it was like before she went missing. But I thought they did a really good job of pushing, well, what did you think at that point? I know we know what you know now, but in that moment, how did you feel? And I think she did a great job there.
Yeah. I mean, the family is great. They're all amazing in this documentary, and I really enjoyed watching them, and I felt like I really got to know Gabby more so than Brian, but I do feel like we got to know a decent amount about Brian. And I love that those kind of details and background info. And I feel like it really makes the case easier to relate to, and it feels like it's people that you could know in your real life.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, I'm excited for part 2, the investigation, and to talk about what actually happened and what we've been alluding to this whole time.
Yeah, I know. There's just so much stuff to talk about with this case, but I am really looking forward to part 2. So we're going to leave you guys here and pick us back up on part 2.